What's going on, everybody? It's Joel here, and today we're going to be taking a first look at the Reebok Nano Pro. Finally, the United States is getting our launch of the Reebok Nano Pros. These come out on October 7th, so right about a week from now. But they've actually been out in other marketplaces around the world for quite some time now. They first popped up at the Wildlife, I want to say a lot earlier in the year. And then not long after that, I think they started selling on the Reebok Australia website. And then not long after that, the South American Reebok sites. And when I asked about them, they said it was going to be a summer launch for the United States as well. But here we are, starting fall, and we're finally getting the Nano Pros. I guess better late than never. So today, we're going to be taking a first look at the Nano Pros, and I'm going to give you my opinions on what I think about the build quality and the materials, and what I think about the use versus the value of the shoe. Because, spoiler alert, these are very expensive training shoes, if you can even call them training shoes at this point. And the reason I say that is because these are kind of like a new category of training shoes. They're more like competition focused shoes. And because of that competition pro use, these things cost an eye-watering $225. Now, that's not too far off from their main competition, which is going to be the Tier 62 Carbon Elites. But anyways, we'll get back to what I think about the value of these shoes a little bit later. Right now, let's just talk about the construction of these shoes. So first off, let's start with the design of these shoes. These kind of resemble a xenomorph egg. So if you're familiar with the Aliens movies, you'd know exactly what I'm talking about, but it kind of has this organic kind of symbiote Spider-Man look to it, and it's very polarizing. Some people absolutely hate it, but some people like it. And I find myself to be one of the people that actually likes this design. And the reason for that is because it doesn't look like every other shoe on the market. A lot of shoes nowadays are just kind of looking all the same. And I applaud Reebok for not going with that. So taking a look at the upper material, we have a newer style of flex weave. It's actually kind of like the older style flex weave, like just woven into a jacquard upper. And then on top of that, there are some more heavier woven lines that go through it so that there are no like material overlays on top of the toe box. The only things that are kind of holding your foot in place are those heavier woven areas, which I think is a pretty cool design. It definitely adds to the organic look of the shoe, makes it look a little bit more seamless. Plus, it probably makes it so that they're saving a little bit of weight by not having to add overlays there. The midfoot wrap on the shoe carries on that same kind of organic, symbiotic design that flows pretty much all throughout the shoe. That midsole wrap is made out of a TPU material. It's more on the flexible side. And then that connects into the eye stays of the shoe. So when you tighten up the shoes, it's going to give you a nice lockdown fit around the middle of your foot. Underneath that, you have some more of the flex weave material interwoven with the knit. And then, of course, we have the Reebok Vector. Now, taking a look at the back of the shoe, there's this white panel here, which is pretty interesting because when you put the shoe against a white background, it looks like there's no heel. But there is definitely a heel. This is the heel counter of the shoe. It's just a overlay heel counter. There's something in there. It's probably just embedded as a heel cup, but that is for sure there. There's a gold Reebok logo on the back. There's no sport mode. These are not clogs or anything like that, though some of the pictures may make them look like that. And then the ankle collar on this shoe is a little bit less padded than on the normal Nano 15s. It's got a cool, nice, like cross-hatched texture to it, which I think feels really nice, and I don't know really the benefit of it, but it does feel pretty nice. There are pods for cushioning all throughout the ankle, and I think overall, even though there's a little bit less ankle cushioning in the shoe, it still feels really comfortable in that area. Coming around to the medial side of the shoe, we have basically the same exact pattern as the lateral side. Another thing with this shoe that might be a little off-putting for people is that there's branding absolutely everywhere. I think when I counted, there was like 12 or 14 or something Reebok logos on the shoes. Just in case you would ever think to forget that these are Reebok made. Now coming back to the tongue of the shoe, it's semi-cushioned. It's not too thick. It's not too thin. I think it's very comfortable. To me, this style of tongue is perfect. It is gusseted on both sides, but we also have the double barrel, I guess, lace loop on the top of the tongue. Normally you'll see like just a single barrel that you'll lace through to keep the tongue in place and make it so that the top part of the shoe feels a little bit more secure. But in this case, we have a double lace barrel, and because of that, lacing these shoes up requires a little bit more work because you can't just pull them tight. You actually have to pull them tight, and then you have to kind of pull the laces so that there's no extra slack there. It's just another layer that goes on top of lacing your shoes up. I guess if you're in the middle of a competition, you've already done that ahead of time, but for somebody that's just throwing their shoes on the day-to-day, that might get a little bit annoying. All right, so now let's take a look at the midsole of the shoe, which is, as it's labeled on the side here, the Super Float midsole that is also paired up with the dual response EVA that was found on the normal Nano 15s. So this Super Float midsole, I'm not so sure how far it runs into the shoe. You can definitely feel it on the forefoot and the heel. You squish it in, it feels much softer than the midsole that was on the Nano 15s. But there is also some dual response EVA somewhere in the shoe. I'm just not so sure where exactly it is. But what I can say is that that Super Float is at least in the forefoot and at the very back part of the heel. Maybe this white foam here might be the dual response, but that to me feels very similar to the heel and the forefoot of the shoe. I don't know. And then on top of that, you have the lift and run chassis, which is this TPU piece that has a Reebok logo. And then that is also the same on the medial side of the shoe with a Reebok logo that is not filled in. And then that lift and run chassis also attaches to the graphite carbon plate that is full length through the shoe. I believe it's full length, feels like it's full length, so I'm gonna say that it's full length in this shoe. So far, the foam on this shoe feels like it's not that soft. This shoe, to me, feels like it's a little bit more dense than the Nano 15s. And I don't think that is just because of the foam. The foam is actually probably pretty softer on this shoe, but the feeling that you get when you're wearing these is not soft. These feel, to me, more similar to the Nano 14s than the Nano 15s. Responsiveness, because of that, is very good, but cushioning, not as much. Now taking a look at the outsole of the shoe, we still have that organic symbiote looking design, and it says that the outsole is decoupled, but there's not really any area that I can spot that at. I guess there's a flex groove right here at the forefoot, and then you have flex screws that run across the forefoot, but there's no real hard break in the outsole. So I'm wondering where or how they defined that decoupled outsole. You do have a split through the middle of the shoe, so that of course you could see that graphite carbon plate just in case you wanted to kick somebody in the face and show it to them. But that is definitely there. There's some exposed foam in the inside there. I don't think that's anything to be worried about. And then you have the outsole that continues on. It's a little bit more fine patterned in the forefoot, and then it gets a little bit more open or coarse at the heel of the shoe. The shape of the outsole is generally flat through the heel to the right around the metatarsals, and then at the metatarsals there's a bit of a rocker on these shoes, and the toe spring angle is, to me, very noticeable. I think that is probably my least favorite thing about these shoes, because at that area, that's like the fulcrum area of the shoe, and it can kind of rock you forward. One thing that I am extremely thankful for is that these have a 3mm drop heel to toe. I find that most carbon plated shoes have a lower heel to toe drop, and I'm not exactly sure why that is, but I'm gonna assume that maybe it makes the carbon plate a little bit easier to actuate, but I am not actually sure. What I will say is that that carbon plate it's noticeable on these shoes. It's really hard to flex them, and that lack of flexibility is still noticeable when these shoes are also on your feet and you have foot pressure on them. It's just a little bit more noticeable if I try to flex them this way. There's definitely a point right around the metatarsals of the shoe where it gets really tough. The toe is not too bad. The heel has a little bit of flex to it. It's a lot easier to flex it when I have like the weight of my body on it, but there's this part at the metatarsals that is fairly stiff. Now, another thing that I am grateful that they improved with these shoes compared to the Nano 15s is the weight of them. Nano 15s were extremely heavy, and it kind of defeated the purpose of the shoe because it was supposed to be a more runnable shoe, but they were just so heavy, no one's gonna wanna do a lot of running in them. These actually are fairly light by training day standards. I clocked them in at 310 grams for a men's size 10.5, which equates to 11.18 ounces. Okay, so when it comes to sizing the Reebok Nano Pros, these fit smaller than the normal Nano 15s, which to me is actually a good thing. Because for the Nano 15s, I was somewhere in between the sizes, a size 10.5, which is like the size that I get pretty much all of my shoes in. That size fit too big, but when I size down to a size 10, they fit a little bit too tight, at least too tight for my liking. So for me, I always went with the 10.5s. I would prefer a little bit more extra room for my toes than a more cramped toe box. The Nano Pros fit somewhere in between. I got these in a size 10.5. They're a little bit smaller than my Nano 15s in 10.5, but they're not quite as small as the 10s. Now, I'm not so sure that's going to warrant a half size up. I would say that if you wore your Nano 15s on the snug side, then you might want to go half size up. But if you wore them with a little bit of room, then just go with the normal size that you have, and I think these are going to fit just fine. There's plenty of toe box width. It's pretty similar in that area to the Nano 15s. There might be a little bit less toe box volume overall. So I guess if you had like tall toes, you might run into an issue there. But for me, I think there's plenty of toe box volume, and there's also a good amount of width. Another thing with this upper, even though it's a little bit thinner feeling than the Nano 15s, I think it provides better foot containment than the Nano 15s, which I thought that was by far the worst part of the shoe. The foot containment was just awful. My feet would go sliding all over the place. That is not that big a problem with the Nano Pros, though I do feel like their foot containment could be a little bit better with the shoes. It's not as bad as the 15s, which are awful, but it is good, but not great on the Nano Pros. But that could also be because I don't have a particularly wide foot. If you had a wider foot that could fill out these shoes a little bit better than me, you might not have an issue with that. Now, keeping in mind that this is a first impressions video of the Nano Pro, I'm gonna save the majority of my performance talk for the final thoughts or final review of the Nano Pros, but I've actually done quite a few workouts in these shoes already. When it comes to flexibility, I think these shoes are still kind of breaking in. They're still pretty stiff. I did a warm-up run. I haven't done any really long runs in these shoes or a lot of double unders or really any like hard jumping movements just yet. So I want to say the flexibility aspect and runnability of these shoes is kind of like, it's kind of on the fence. To me, they feel pretty stiff and there's not a whole lot of cushioning. So I hope that breaks in. I'm not so sure it will. I think part of the reason why they feel not so comfortable is the way that they're stacked. There is probably foam and then the plate and then more foam. And it splits up the foam. The heel flexibility on the shoes is not so great. If like the overall just flexibility throughout the shoe is just not so great. So they feel very stiff. At least that's what I noticed when I was doing running, a little bit clunky. And hopefully that carbon plate breaks in a little bit and relaxes so that these feel a little bit more natural to run in. Once again, the cushioning to me just feels a little bit on the light side. Maybe that's what you want from like a competition shoe, but I would think that because these shoes have a carbon plate, you could add some cushioning to them to kind of offset the carbon plate. But they just feel a little bit harsh at the moment. Another thing with them is you do not want to rope climb in these shoes. Now, I already knew by looking at these shoes that they would not hold up for rope climbs, and I was unfortunately right. And because of the way that the outsole is attached to the lift and run chassis, where it's just this edge right here, there's no kind of sidewall that runs up from the outsole. It only took one rope climb for me to peel the outsole away from the shoe. So that's a little bit weird, because you would think that for a pro shoe that should be a pro feature to have a rope pro, but unfortunately on the Nano Pros, that is not something that you can do with these shoes. Do not rope climb in your Nano Pros. You're going to ruin your very expensive pair of shoes for nothing. Now, when it came to doing some lifts in these shoes, I've done power cleans, I've done deadlifts. I think that the 3mm drop makes these shoes actually pretty decent for deadlifts, and the fact that they don't feel like they're soft at all. I thought responsiveness was excellent. I didn't have any issues pulling what I was doing in these shoes, which is I did like 375 for some reps, and I thought that deadlifting in these shoes was for sure better than the Nano 15, and I want to say better than the Nano 14s, but not by a whole lot. They actually feel very similar to the Nano 14s, even though Nano 14s definitely have a higher drop that is felt throughout the shoe. When it came to power cleans, I thought these actually did pretty well. They're fairly snappy and responsive. The toe spring angle doesn't really get you, but for power cleans, I thought that these shoes did very well, and I hope that they do well for other Olympic weightlifting movements. I have some push presses today, and I hope that these help me drive the bar up off of me. I'm not so sure they will. I'm not so sure that's something that most people are going to be able to feel, but hopefully they do. Another thing that I noticed is that the grip, I'm still kind of iffy about it. It doesn't feel that great to me. Maybe it's the clear outsole, but it feels okay, just not amazing. I thought the Nano 15 grip was actually really good, and this grip, it seems so-so. It's not the worst, it's not the best. Jury's still out on it. But now, time for the value and price. These things are going to retail for $225 US. Very expensive. A lot more expensive than the Nano 15s, about $75 more than them. And pretty much every other top tier cross training shoe at the moment. So it really comes down to, are you willing to spend that? I think it's a fine price, to be honest with you. Like, if you look at running shoes go up to, $300-500 if you really wanted to. Does anyone need a $500 pair of running shoes? Probably not, besides the pros that are trying to win marathons and win races. And I think that will apply to something like this, and obviously like the Tier 62 carbons. Does everybody need it? No. Do you need to spend money on it? No. You can get a $150 pair of shoes that is going to be fine for training. And then when you look at training, what are you training for? Are you training to get stronger, faster, fitter? Then you could probably just get away with some of the just normal training shoes. If you're training to do competitions and win money, then you'll have no problem spending the extra bit on the Nano Pros as you would any other pro shoe, I guess. But that's just my 2 cents on the matter. I think, yes, they are expensive, but I don't think that it is like outlandish considering the use case of the shoe. I don't think that everybody needs a pro shoe either. But that is just about it for the first impressions of the Nano Pro. If you guys have any questions about this shoe, feel free to ask them in the comment section. As always, thanks for watching, hit that like button, and I'll see you in the next video.